The wife of a rich man fell sick, and as she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, be good, and then the good God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." Thereupon she closed her eyes and departed. Every day the maiden went out to her mother's grave and wept, and she remained good. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, and by the time the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. The woman had brought with her into the house 2 daughters, who were beautiful and fair of face, but wild and black of heart. Now began a bad time for the poor stepchild. "It's a stupid goose to sit in the parlor with us," they said. "He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen." They took her pretty clothes away from her, put an old grey bedgown on her, and gave her wooden shoes. "Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is," they cried, and laughed, and led her into the kitchen. There she had to do hard work from morning till night, get up before daybreak, carry water, light fires, cook and wash. Besides this, sisters did her every imaginable injury. They mocked her and emptied her peas and lentils into the ashes, so that she was forced to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked till she was weary and she had no bed to go to, but had to sleep by the hearth in the cinders, and as on that count she always looked dusty and dirty, they called her Cinderella. It happened that the father was going once to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said one. "Pearls and jewels," said the second. "And you, Cinderella," said he, "what will you have?" "Father, break off for me the first branch which knocks against your hat on your way home." So he bought beautiful dresses, pearls and jewels for his 2 stepdaughters. And on his way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the branch and took it with him. When he reached home, he gave his stepdaughters the things which they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the branch from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him, went on her mother's grave, and planted the branch on it, and wept so much that the tears fell down on it and watered it, and it grew and became a handsome tree. Thrice a day Cinderella went and sat beneath it, and wept and prayed, and a little white bird always came on the tree, and if Cinderella expressed a wish, the bird threw down to her what she had wished for. It happened, however, that the king gave orders for a festival which was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful young girls in the country were invited, in order that his son might choose himself a bride. When the 2 stepsisters heard that they were to appear among the number, they were delighted, called Cinderella and said, "Comb our hair for us, brush our shoes, and fasten our buckles, for we are going to the wedding at the king's palace." Cinderella obeyed, but wept, because she too would like to go with them to the dance, and begged her stepmother to allow her to do so. "You go, Cinderella," said she, "covered in dust and dirt as you are, and would go to the festival. You have no clothes and shoes, and yet would dance." As, however, Cinderella went on asking, the stepmother said at last, "I have emptied a dish of lentils into the ashes for you. If you pick them out again in 2 hours, you shall go with us." The maiden went through the back door into the garden and called, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all the birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." The 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at last all the birds beneath the sky came whirring and crowding in and alighted amongst the ashes. And the pigeons nodded with their head and began pick, and the rest also began pick, and gathered all the good grains into the dish. Hardly had 1 hour passed before they had finished, and all flew out again. Then the girl took the dish to her stepmother and was glad, and believed that now she would be allowed to go with them to the festival. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no clothes and you cannot dance. You would only be laughed at." And as Cinderella wept at this, the stepmother said, If you can pick 2 dishes of lentils out of the ashes for me in 1 hour, you shall go with us. And she thought to herself that she most certainly cannot do it. When the stepmother had emptied 2 dishes of lentils amongst the ashes, the maiden went through the back door into the garden and cried, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all the birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at length all the birds beneath the sky came wiring and crowding in and aligned amongst the ashes. And the doves nodded with their heads and began to pick, and others also began to pick, and gathered all the good seeds into the dishes. And before half an hour was over, they had already finished, and all flew out again. Then the maiden was delighted, and believed that she might now go with them to the wedding. But the stepmother said, "All this will not help. You cannot go with us, for you have no clothes and cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." On this she turned her back on Cinderella, and hurried away with her 2 proud daughters. And as no one was now at home, Cinderella went to her mother's grave beneath the hazel tree and cried, "Shiver and quiver, little tree. Silver and gold throw down over me." Then the birds threw a gold and silver dress down to her, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She put on the dress with all speed and went to the wedding. Her stepsisters and the stepmother, however, did not know her, and thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in the golden dress. They never once thought of Cinderella, and believed that she was sitting at home in the dirt, picking lentils out of the ashes. The prince approached her, took her by the hand and danced with her. He would dance with no other maiden, and never let loose of her hand. And if anyone else came to invite her, he said, "This is my partner." She danced till it was evening, and then she wanted to go home. But the king's son said, "I will go with you and bear you company," for he wished to see to whom the beautiful maiden belonged. She escaped from him, however, and sprang into the pigeon house. The king's son waited until the father came, and then he told him that the unknown maiden had leaped into the pigeon's house. The old man thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" And they had to bring him an axe and a pickaxe, that he might hoe the pigeon house to pieces. But there was no one inside it. And when they got home, Cinderella lay in her dirty clothes among the ashes, and a dim little oil lamp was burning on the mantelpiece. For Cinderella had jumped down quickly from the back of the pigeon house, and had run to the little hazel tree, and there she had taken off her beautiful clothes, and laid them on the grave, and the birds had taken them away again. And then she had seated herself in the kitchen amongst the ashes, in a grey gown. Next day the festival began afresh, and her parents and stepsisters had gone once more. Cinderella went to the hazel tree and said, "Shiver and quiver, my little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." Then the birds threw down a much more beautiful dress than on the preceding day, and when Cinderella appeared at the wedding in this dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The king's son had waited until she came, and instantly took her by the hand and danced with no one but her. When others came and invited her, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, she wished to leave, and the king's son followed her and wanted to see into which house she went. But she sprang away from him and into the garden behind the house. Therein stood a beautiful tall tree, on which hung the most magnificent pears. She clambered so nimbly between the branches like a squirrel that the king's son did not know where she was gone. He waited until her father came, and said to him, "The unknown maiden has escaped from me, and I believe she has climbed up the pear tree." The father thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" and had an axe brought and cut the tree down, but no one was on it. And when they got into the kitchen, Cinderella lay there among the ashes as usual, for she had jumped down on the other side of the tree to the bird on the little hazel tree, had taken the beautiful dress to the bird on the little hazel tree, and put on her grey gown. On the third day, when the parents and sisters had gone away, Cinderella went once more to her mother's grave and said to the little tree, Shiver and quiver, my little tree. Silver and gold throw down over me. And now the birds threw down to her a dress which was more splendid and magnificent than any she had yet had. And the slippers were golden, and when she went to the festival in the dress, no one knew how to speak for astonishment. The king's son danced with her only, and if anyone invited her to dance, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, Cinderella wished to leave, and the king's son was anxious to go with her. But she escaped from him so quickly that he could not follow her. The king's son, however, had employed a ruse, and had caused the whole staircase to be smeared with pitch. And there, when she ran down, had the maiden's left slipper remained stuck. The king's son picked it up, and it was small and dainty, and all golden. Next morning he went with it to the father, and said to him, "No one shall be my wife, but she whose foot this golden slipper fits." Then were the two sisters glad, for they had pretty feet. The eldest went with the shoe into her room and wanted to try it on, and her mother stood by, but she could not get her big toe into it, and the shoe was too small for her. Then the mother gave her a knife and said, "Cut the toe off. When you are a queen, you will have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut the toe off, forced the foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. Then he took her on his horse as his bride and rode away with her. They were obliged, however, to pass the grave, and there on the hazel tree sat the two pigeons and cried, turn and peep, there is blood within the shoe. The shoe, it is too small for her, the true bride awaits for you." Then he looked at her foot and saw how the blood was trickling from it. He turned his horse round and took the false bride home again, and said she was not the true one, and that the other sister was to put the shoe on. Then this one went into her chamber and got her toes safely into the shoe, but her heel was too large. So her mother gave her a knife and said, "Cut a bit off your heel. When you're queen, you will have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut a bit off her heel, forced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. He took her on his horse as his bride and rode away with her. But when they passed by the hazel tree, the two pigeons sat on it and cried, turn and peep, there is blood within the shoe. The shoe, it is too small for her, the true bride awaits for you." He looked down at her foot and saw how the blood was running out of her shoe, and how it had stained her white stocking quite red. Then he turned his horse and took the false bride home again. "This also is not the right one," said he. "Have you no other daughter?" "No," said the man. "There is still a little stunted kitchen wench, which my late wife left behind, but she cannot possibly be the bride." The king's son said he was to send her up to him. But the mother answered, "Oh no, she's much too dirty. She cannot show herself." But he absolutely insisted on it, and Cinderella had to be called. She first washed her hands and face clean, and then went and bowed before the king's son, who gave her the golden shoe. Then she seated herself on a stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it into the slipper, which fitted like a glove. And when she rose up and the king's son looked at her face, he recognized the beautiful maiden who had danced with him and cried, "This is the true bride." The stepmother and the two sisters were horrified and became pale with rage. He, however, took Cinderella on his horse and rode away with her. As they passed by the hazel tree, two white pigeons cried, turn and peep, no blood is in the shoe. The shoe is not too small for her. The true bride rides with you." And when they cried that, the two came flying down and placed themselves on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right and the other on the left, and remained sitting there when the wedding with the king's son was to be celebrated. The two false sisters came and wanted to get into favor with Cinderella and share her good fortune. When the couple went to church, the elder was at the right side and the younger at the left, and the pigeons pecked out one eye from each of them. Afterwards, as they came back, the elder was at the left and the younger was at the right, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye from each, and thus, for their wickedness and falsehood, they were punished with blindness all their days. There was once a king's son who was seized with the desire to travel about the world, and took no one with him but a faithful servant. One day he came to a great forest, and when darkness took over him, he could find no shelter and knew not where to pass the night. Then he saw a girl who was going towards a small house, and when he came near, he saw that the maiden was young and beautiful. He spoke to her and said, "Dear child, can I and my servant find shelter for the night in that little house?" "Oh yes," said the girl in a sad voice, "that you certainly can, but I do not advise you to venture it. Do not go in." "Why not?" asked the king's son. The maiden sighed and said, "My stepmother practices wicked arts. She is ill disposed towards the strangers." Then he saw very well that he had come to a house of a witch, but as it was dark and he could not go further, and also was not afraid, he entered. The old woman was sitting in an armchair by the fire, and looked at the strangers with her red eyes. "Good evening," growled she, and pretended to be quite friendly. "Take a seat and rest yourselves." She feigned the fire on which she was cooking something in a small pot. The daughter warned the two to be careful, to eat nothing and drink nothing, for the old woman brewed evil drinks. They slept quietly until early morning, when they were making ready for the departure, and the king's son, who was already seated on his horse. The old woman said, "Stop a moment. I'll first hand you a parting draught." She then fetched it. The king's son rode away, and the servant, who had to buckle his saddle tight, was the only one present when the wicked witch came with the drink. "Take that to you, master," said she. But at that instant the glass broke and the poison spirted on the horse, and it was so strong that the animal immediately fell down dead. The servant ran after his master and told him what had happened, but as he did not want to leave his saddle behind, he ran back to fetch it. When he came to the dead horse, however, a raven was already sitting on it, devouring it. "Who knows whether we shall find anything better today?" said the servant. So he killed the raven and took it with him. And now they journeyed onwards into the forest, the whole day, but could not get out of it. By nightfall, they found an inn and entered it. The servant gave the raven to the innkeeper to prepare for the supper. They had stumbled, however, on a den of murderers, and during the night 12 of these came, intending to kill the strangers and rob them. But before they set about this work, they sat down to supper, and the innkeeper and the witch sat down with them, and together they ate a dish of soup in which was cut up the flesh of the raven. Hardly they had swallowed a couple of mouthfuls before they all fell down dead, for the raven had communicated to them the poison from the horse's flesh. There was no one else left in the house but the innkeeper's daughter, who was honest and had taken no part in the godless deeds. She opened all doors to the stranger and showed him the store of treasures, but the king's son said she might keep everything, he would have none of it, and rode onwards with his servant. After they had traveled about for a long time, they came to a town in which was a beautiful but proud princess, who had made it known that whosoever should set her a riddle which she could not guess, that man should be her husband. But if she guessed it, his head must be cut off. She had 3 days to guess it in, but was so clever that she always found the answer to the riddle given her before the appointed time. 9 had already perished in this manner. The king's son arrived, and blinded by her great beauty, was willing to stake his life for it. Then he went to her and laid his riddle before her. "What is this?" said he. "One slew none, yet slew 12. And she did not know what that was. She thought and thought, but she could not solve it. She opened her riddle books, but it was not in them. In short, her wisdom was at an end. As she did not know how to help herself, she ordered her maid to creep into the lord's sleeping chamber, listen to his dreams, and thought that he could perhaps speak in his sleep and reveal the riddle. But the clever servant had placed himself in the bed instead of his master, and when the maid came there, he tore off from her the mantle in which she was wrapped, and chased her out with rods. The second night the king's daughter sent her maid-in-waiting, who was to see if she could succeed better in listening. but the servant took her mantle away from her as well and hunted her out with rods. Now the master believed himself safe for the third night and lay down in his own bed. Then came the princess herself, and she had put on a misty grey mantle, and she seated herself near him. And when she thought that he was asleep and dreaming, she spoke to him, and hoped that he would answer in his sleep, as many do. But he was awake, and understood and heard everything quite well. Then she asked, "One Sulunan, what is that?" He replied, "A raven which ate of a dead and poisoned horse, and died of it." She inquired further, "And yet slew 12. What is that?" He answered, "That means 12 murderers who ate the raven and died of it." When she knew the answers to the riddle, she wanted to steal away, but he held her mantle so fast that she was forced to leave it behind her. Next morning, the king's daughter announced that she had guessed the riddle and sent for the 12 judges and expounded it before them. But the youth begged for a hearing and said, "She stole into my room in the night and questioned me. Otherwise she could not have guessed it." The judges said, "Bring us a proof of this." Then were the 3 mantles brought, tied her by the servant, and when the judges saw the misty grey one, which the king's daughter usually wore, they said, "Let the mantle be embroidered with gold and silver, and then it will be your wedding mantle." There was once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length, the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it because it belonged to an enchantress who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion Rapunzel, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it and had the greatest desire to eat some. This desire increased every day, and as she knew that she could not get any of it, she quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't eat some of those rampion, which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die." The man who loved her thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of that rampion yourself, let it cost what it will." At twilight, he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it and ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden in the gloom of evening. Therefore he let himself down again. But when he had clambered down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How can you dare," said she with angry look, "descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Ah," answered he, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window and felt such a longing for it that she could have died if she had not got some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened and said to him, "If the case be as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition. You must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world. It shall be well treated, and I will take care of it like a mother." The man in his terror consented to everything, and when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest, and had neither doors nor stairs, but quite at the top with a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them around one of the hooks of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 ells down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then he heard a song, which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed the time in letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her and look for the door of the tower. But none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and he heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I will too try my fortune," said he. And the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Immediately, the hair fell down and the king's son climbed up. At first, Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man such as her eyes had never yet beheld came to her. But when the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had let him have no rest, and he had been forced to see her, then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she could take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He will love me more than the old Dame Gothel does." And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will wave a letter with it, and when that is ready I will descend, and you will take me on your horse." They agreed that until that time he should come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment." "Ah, you wicked child," cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice around her hand, seized a pair of scissors with her right, and snip, snap, they were cut off, and the lovely braids lay on the ground. And she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day that she cast out Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braids of hair, which she cut off, to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks. "Aha," she cried mockingly, "you would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. The cat has got it and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again." The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leaped down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered quite blind about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did naught but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert, where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it, and when he approached, Rapunzel knew him and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again. and he could see with them as before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented. There was once upon a time an old goat who had 7 little kids, and loved them with all the love of a mother for her children. One day she wanted to go into the forest and fetch some food, so she called all 7 of her and said, "Dear children, I have to go into the forest. Be on your guard against a wolf. If he comes in, he will devour you all. Skin, hair, and everything. The wretch often disguises himself, but you will know him at once by his rough voice and his black feet." The kids said, "Dear mother, we will take good care of ourselves. You may go away without any anxiety." Then the old one bleated away and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before one knocked at the house door and called, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the little kids knew that it was the wolf by the rough voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a soft voice, pleasant voice, but your voice is rough. You're the wolf." Then the wolf went away to a shopkeeper and bought himself a great lump of chalk, ate this, and made his voice soft with it. Then he came back, knocked at the door of the house, and called, "Open the door, dear little children. Your mother is here and brought something back with her for all of you." But the wolf had laid his black paws against the window, and the children saw them and cried, "Who will not open the door? Our mother has not black feet like you. You're the wolf." Then the wolf ran back to the baker and said, "I have hurt my feet. Rub some dough over them for me, please." And when the baker had rubbed his feet over, he ran to the miller and said, "Strew some white meal over my feet for me." The miller thought to himself, "The wolf wants to deceive someone," and refused. But the wolf said, "If you will not do it, I'll devour you." The miller was afraid and made his paws white for him. So now the wretch went back for the 3rd time to the house door, knocked at it, and said, "Open the door for me, children. Your dear little mother has come home and brought every one of you something back from the forest with her." The little kids cried, "First show us your paws, and then we may, if you are our dear little mother." Then he put his paws in through the window, and when the kids saw that they were white, they believed that all he said was true and opened the door. But who should come in but the wolf? They were terrified and wanted to hide themselves. One sprang under the table, and the 2nd went into the bed. The 3rd went into the stove, the 4th into the kitchen, and the 5th into the cupboard. The 6th under the washing bowl, and the 7th into the clock case. But the wolf found them all and used no great ceremony. One after another he swallowed them down his throat. The youngest, who was in the clock case, was the only one he did not find. When the wolf had satisfied his appetite, he took himself off, laid himself down under a tree in the great meadow outside, and began to sleep. Soon afterwards the old goat came home again from the forest. Ah, what a sight she saw there! The house door stood wide open. The tables, chairs, the benches were thrown down. The washing bowl lay broken into pieces, and the quilts and the pillows were pulled off of the bed. She sought her children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called them one after another by their name, but no one answered. At last, when she came to the youngest, a soft voice cried, "Dear mother, I'm in the clock case." She took the kid out, and it told her that the wolf had come and had eaten all the others. Then you may imagine how she wept over her poor children. At length, in her grief, she went out, and the youngest kid ran with her. When they came to the meadow, there lay the wolf by the tree and snored so loud that the branches shook. She looked at him on every side and saw that someone was moving and struggling in his groped belly. "Ah, heavens," she said, "is it possible that my poor children, whom he has swallowed down for his supper, can still be alive?" Then the kid had to run home and fetch scissors and a needle and thread, and the goat cut open the monster's stomach. And hardly she had made one cut, then one little kid thrust his head out, and when she cut further, all 6 sprang out one after another, and were all still alive, and had suffered no injury whatever, for in this greediness the monster had swallowed them whole. what rejoicing there was. They embraced their dear mother and jumped like a sailor at his wedding. The mother, however, said, "Now go and look for some big stones, and we will fill this wicked beast's stomach with them while he's still asleep." Then the 7 kids dragged the stones tighter with all the speed and put as many of them into his stomach as they could get in. And the mother then sewed him up again in the greatest haste, so that he was not aware of anything and never once stirred. When the wolf at length had his fill of sleep, he got on his legs, and as the stones in his stomach made him very thirsty, he wanted to go to the well to drink some water. When he began to walk and move about, the stones in his stomach knocked against each other and rattled. Then he cried, "What rumbles and tumbles against my poor bones? I thought I ate 6 kids, but it feels like big stones." And when he got to the well and stopped over the water to drink, the heavy stones made him fall in, and he had to drown miserably. When the 7 kids saw that, they came running to the spot and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead, the wolf is dead," and danced for joy around about the well with their mother. There was once a man who had 7 sons, and still he had no daughter. However much he wished for one. At length his wife again gave him hope of a child, and when he came into the world, it was a girl. The joy was great, but the child was sickly and small and had to be privately baptized on account of his weakness. The father sent one of the boys in haste to the spring to fetch water for baptism. The other 6 went with him, and as each of them wanted to be the first to fill it, the jug fell into the well. There they stood and did not know what to do, and none of them dared to go home. As they still did not return, the father grew impatient and said, "They have sadly forgotten it while playing some game, the wicked boys." He became afraid that the girl would have to die without being baptized, and in his anger cried, "I wish the boys were all turned into ravens." Hardly was the word spoken before he heard a whirring of wings over his head, looked up, and saw 7 coal-black ravens flying away. The parents could not withdraw the curse, and sad, however they were, at the loss of their 7 sons, still to some extent comforted themselves with their dear little daughter, who soon grew strong and every day became more beautiful. For a long time she did not know that she had brothers, for her parents were careful not to mention them before her. But one day she accidentally heard some people saying of herself that the girl was certainly beautiful, but that in reality she was to blame for the misfortune which had befallen her 7 brothers. Then she was much troubled, and went to her father and mother and asked if it was true that she had brothers, and what had become of them. The parents now dared keep the secret no longer, but said that what had befallen her brothers was the will of heaven, and that her birth was only being the innocent cause. But the maiden took it to heart daily, and thought she must save her brothers. She had no rest or peace until she set out secretly and went forth into the wild world to search for her brothers and set them free, let it cost what it might. She took nothing with her but a little ring belonging to her parents as a keepsake, a loaf of bread against hunger, a little pitcher of water against thirst, and a little chair as a provision against weariness. And now she went continually onwards, far, far to the very end of the world. Then she came to the sun, but it was too hot and terrible, and devoured little children. Hastily she ran away, and ran to the moon, but it was far too cold, and also awful and malicious. And when it saw the child, it said, I smell the flesh of man." At this she ran swiftly away and came to the stars. Which were kind and good to her, and each of them sat on its own particular little chair. But the morning star arose and gave her the drumstick of a chicken and said, If you have not that drumstick, you cannot open the glass mountain. And in the glass mountain are your brothers. The maiden took the drumstick, wrapped it carefully in a cloth, and went onwards again until she came to the glass mountain. The door was shut, and she thought she would take out the drumstick. But when she undid the cloth, it was empty, and she had lost the good star's present. What was she now to do? She wished to rescue her brothers, and had no key to the glass mountain. The good sister took a knife, cut off one of her little fingers, and put it in the door, and succeeded in opening it. When she had gone inside, a little dwarf came to meet her and said, "My child, what are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers, the 7 ravens," she replied. The dwarf said, "The Lord Ravens are not at home, but if you will wait here until they come, step in." Thereupon the little dwarf cried the ravens, "Dinner in," on 7 little plates and in 7 little glasses, and the little sister ate a morsel from each plate, and from each glass she took a sip. But in the last little glass she dropped the ring, which she had brought away with her. Suddenly she heard a whirring of wings and a rushing through the air, and then the little dwarf said, "Now the Lord Ravens are flying home." Then they came and wanted to eat and drink, and looked for their little plates and glasses, then said one after the other, "Who has eaten something from a plate? Who has drunk out of my little glass?" It was a human mouth. And when the 7th came to the bottom of the glass, the ring rolled against his mouth. Then he looked at it and saw that it was the ring belonging to his father and mother, and said, "God grant that our little sister may be here, and then we shall be free." When the maiden who was standing behind the door watching heard that wish, she came forth, and on this all the ravens were restored to their human form again. And they embraced and kissed each other and went joyfully home. In a certain country there was once great lamentation, or a wild boar that laid waste the farmers' fields, killed the cattle and ripped up people's bodies with his tusk. The king promised a large reward to anyone who would free the land from this plague, but the beast was so big and so strong that no one dared to go near the forest in which it lived. At last the king gave notice that whosoever should capture or kill the wild boar should have his only daughter to wife. Now there lived in the country 2 brothers, sons of a poor man, who declared themselves willing to undertake the hazardous enterprise. The elder, who was crafty and shrewd, out of pride; the younger, who was innocent and simple, from a kind heart. The king said, "In order that you may be the more sure of finding the beast, you must go in the forest from opposite sides." So the elder went in on the east side, and the younger on the west. When the younger had gone a short way, a little man stepped up to him. He held in his hand a black spear, and said, "I give you this spear because your heart is pure and good. With this you can boldly attack the wild boar, and it will do you no harm." He thanked the little man, shouldered the spear, and went on fearlessly. Before long he saw the beast, which rushed at him, but he held the spear towards it, and in its blind fury it ran so swiftly against it that its heart cloven in twain. Then he took the monster on his back and went homeward with it to the king. And he came out to the other side of the wood, and there stood at the entrance of the house where people were making merry with wine and dancing. His older brother had gone in there, and thinking that after all the boar would not run away from him, was going to drink until he felt brave. But when he saw his young brother coming out of the wood, laden with his bounty, his envious evil heart gave him no peace. He called out to him, "Come in, dear brother, rest and refresh yourself with a cup of wine." The youth, who suspected no evil, went in and told him about the good little man who had given him the spear
wherewith he had slain the boar. The elder brother kept him there until the evening, and when they went away together, and when in the darkness they came to a bridge over a brook, the elder brother let the other go first, and when he was halfway across, he gave him such a blow from behind that he fell down dead. He buried him beneath the bridge, took the boar and carried it to the king, pretending that he had killed it, whereupon he obtained the king's daughter in marriage. When his younger brother did not come back, he said the boar must have ripped up his body, and everyone believed it. But as nothing remains hidden from God, so this black deed also came to light. Years afterwards, a shepherd was driving his herd across the bridge and saw lying in the sand beneath a snow-white little bone. He thought that it would make a good mouthpiece, so he clambered down and picked it up and cut out of it a mouthpiece for his horn. But when he blew through it for the first time, to his great astonishment, the bone began of its own accord to sing. Ah, friend, thou blowest upon my bone. Long have I lain beside the water. My brother slew me for the boar, and took for his wife the king's young daughter. What a wonderful horn, said the shepherd. It sings by itself. I must take it to my lord the king. And when he came with it to the king, the horn again began to sing its little song. The king understood it all, and caused the ground below the bridge to be dug up. And then the whole skeleton of the murdered man came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed, and was soon up in a sack and drowned. But the bones of the murdered man were laid to rest in a beautiful tomb in the churchyard.
There was once a man whose wife died, and a woman whose husband died, and the man had a daughter, and the woman also had a daughter. The girls were acquainted with each other, and went out walking together, and afterwards came to the woman in her house. Then said she to the man's daughter, Listen, tell your father that I would like to marry him, and then you shall wash yourself in milk every morning, and drink wine, but my own daughter shall drink water and wash herself in water. The girl went home and told her father what the woman had said. The man said, What shall I do? Marriage is a joy and also a torment. At length, as he could not come to no decision, he pulled off his boot and said, Take this boot, it has a hole in the sole of it. Go with it up to the loft, hang it up on the big nail, and then pour water into it. If it holds the water, then I will take a wife again. But if it run through, I will not. The girl did as she was bid, but the water drew the hole together, and the boot became full to the top. She informed her father how it had turned out. Then he himself went up, and when he saw that she was right, he went to the widow and wooed her, and the wedding was celebrated. The next morning, when the two girls got up, there stood before the man's daughter milk for her to wash in, and wine for her to drink. But before the woman's daughter stood water to wash herself with, and water for drinking. On the second morning stood water for washing and water for drinking, before the man's daughter as well as for the woman's daughter. And on the third morning stood water for washing and water for drinking before the man's daughter, and milk for washing and wine for drinking before the woman's daughter. And so it continued. The woman became her stepdaughter's biggest enemy, and day by day did her best to treat her still worse. She was also envious because her stepdaughter was beautiful and lovable, and her own daughter was ugly and repulsive. Once in winter, when everything was frozen as hard as a stone and hill, and Whale lay covered with snow, the woman made a frock of paper, called her stepdaughter, and said, Here, put on this dress, and go out into the wood, and fetch me a little basket full of strawberries. I have a fancy for some. Good heavens, said the girl, no strawberries grow in winter. The ground is frozen, and besides, the snow has covered everything. And why am I to go in this paper frock? It is so cold outside that one's very breath freezes. The wind will blow through the frock, and the thorns tear off my body. Will you contradict me? Said the stepmother. See that you go and do not show your face again until you have the basket full of strawberries.
Then she gave her a little piece of hard bread and said, "This will last you the day," and thought, "You will die of cold and hunger outside, and will never be seen again by me." Then the maiden was obedient and put on the paper frock and went out with the basket. Far and wide there was nothing but snow, and not a green blade to be seen. When she got into the wood, she saw a small house, out of which peeped 3 little men. She wished them a good day and knocked modestly at the door. They cried, "Come in," and she entered the room and seated herself on the bench by the stove, where she began to warm herself and eat her breakfast. The little men said, "Give us some of it too." "Willingly," she said, and divided her piece of bread into 2 and gave them the half. They asked, "What do you do here in the forest in the winter time, in your thin dress?" "Ah," she answered, "I'm to look for a basket full of strawberries, and I'm not to go home until I take them with me." When she had eaten her bread, they gave her a broom and said, "Sweep away the snow at the back door." But when she was outside, 3 little men said to each other, "What shall we give her as she is so good, and she has shared her bread with us?" The first said, "My gift is that she shall grow more beautiful every day." The second said, "My gift is that gold pieces shall fall out of her mouth every time she speaks." The third said, "My gift is that a king shall come and take her to wife." The girl, however, did as the little man had bidden her, swept away the snow behind the little house with the broom. And what did she find but real ripe strawberries, which came up quite red out of the snow. In her joy, she hastily gathered her basketful, thanked the little man, shook hands with each of them, and ran home to take her stepmother what she had longed for so much. When she went in, she said, "Good evening." A piece of gold at once fell out of her mouth. Thereupon, she related what had happened to her in the wood, but with each and every word she spoke, gold pieces fell from her mouth, until very soon the whole room was covered with them. "Now look at her arrogance," cried the stepsister, "to throw about gold in that way." But she was secretly envious of it, and wanted to go into the forest, also to seek strawberries. The mother said, "No, my dear little daughter, it is too cold, you might freeze to death." However, as the daughter let her have no peace, the mother at last yielded, made her a magnificent coat of fur, which she was obliged to put on, and gave her bread and butter and cake for her journey. The girl went to the forest and straight up to that little house. The 3 little men peeped out again, and when she did not greet them, and without looking round at them, and without speaking to them, she went awkwardly into the room, seated herself by the stove, and began to eat her bread and butter and cake. "Give us some of it," cried the little man. But she replied, "There is not enough for myself, so how can I give it away to other people?" When she had finished eating, they said, "There is a broom for you, sweep it all clean in front of the back door." "Sweep for yourself," she answered, "I'm not your servant." When she saw that they were not going to give her anything, she went out by the door. Then the little men said to each other, "What shall we give her as she is so naughty, and has a wicked envious heart, that will never let her do a good turn to anyone?" The first said, "I grant her that she may grow uglier every day." The second said, "I grant that at every word she says a toad shall spring out of her mouth." The third said, "I grant that she may die a miserable death." The maid looked for strawberries outside, but as she found none, she went angrily home. And when she opened her mouth and was about to tell her mother what had happened to her in the wood, with every word she said, a toad sprang out of her mouth, so that everyone was seized with horror. Then the stepmother was still more enraged, and thought of nothing but how to do every possible injury to the man's daughter, whose beauty, however, grew daily. At length she took a cauldron, set it on fire, and boiled yarn in it. When it was boiled, she flung it on the poor girl's shoulder, and gave her an axe in order that she might go to the frozen river, cut a hole in the ice, and rinse the yarn. She was obedient, went thither and cut a hole in the ice, and while she was in the midst of her cutting, a splendid carriage came driving up, in which sat the king. The carriage stopped, and the king asked, "My child, who are you? What are you doing here?" "I am a poor girl, and I'm rinsing yarn." Then the king felt compassion, and when he saw that she was so very beautiful, he said to her, "Will you go away with me?" "Ah, yes, with all my heart," she answered. For she was glad to get away from the mother and sister, so she got into the carriage and drove away with the king. And when they arrived at his palace, the wedding was celebrated with great pomp, as the little man had granted to the maiden. When the year was over, the queen bore a son, and as the stepmother had heard of her great fortune, she came with her daughter to the palace and pretended that she wanted to pay her a visit. But when the king had gone out and no one else was present, the wicked woman seized the queen by the head and daughter seized her by the feet, and they lifted her out of the bed and threw her out of the window into the stream which flowed by. The ugly daughter laid herself in the bed, and the old woman covered her up over her head. When the king came home again and wanted to speak to his wife, the old woman cried, "Hush, hush, that can't be now. She's laying in the woolen sweat. You must let her rest today." The king suspected no evil and did not come back again till next morning. And as he talked with his wife, and she answered him with every word a toad leaped out, whereas formerly a piece of gold had fallen. Then he asked what that could be. But the old woman said that she had got that from the woolen sweat and would soon lose it again. During the night, however, a scullion saw a duck come swimming up the gutter, and it said, "King, what art thou doing now? Sleepest thou, or wakest thou?" And as it returned no answer, it said, "And my guest, what may they do?" The scullion said, "They are sleeping soundly too." And then it said again, "What does little baby mine?" He answered, "Sleeps in a cradle fine." Then she went upstairs in the form of a queen, nursed the baby, shook up its little bed, covered it over, and then swam away again down the gutter in the shape of a duck. She came thus for 2 nights. On the third, she said to the scullion, "Go and tell the king to take his sword and swing it 3 times over me on the threshold." And the scullion ran and told this to the king, who came with his sword and swung it thrice over the spirit. And at the 3rd time, his wife stood before him, strong, living, and healthy as she had been before. Thereupon the king was full of great joy, but he kept the queen hidden in a chamber until the Sunday, when the baby was to be christened. And when it was christened, he said, "What does a person deserves who drags another out of the bed and throws him in the water? The wretch deserves nothing better," answered the old woman, "than to be taken, put into a barrel, stuck full of nails, and rolled downhill into the water." Then the king said, "You have pronounced your own sentence." And he ordered such a barrel to be brought, and the old woman to be put into it with her daughter. And the top was hammered on, and the barrel rolled downhill until it went into the river. A long time ago, there lived a king who was famed for his wisdom through all the land. Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to him through the air. But he had a strange custom. Every day after dinner, when the table was clear and no one else was present, a trusty servant had to bring him one more dish. It was covered, however, and even the servant did not know what was in it. Neither did anyone know, for the king never took off the cover to eat off it until he was quite alone. This had gone for a long time, when one day the servant who took away the dish was overcome with such curiosity that he could not help carrying the dish into his room. When he had carefully locked the door, he lifted up the cover and saw a white snake lying on the dish. But when he saw it, he could not deny himself the pleasure of tasting it, so he cut off a little bit and put it into his mouth. No sooner had it touched his tongue than he heard a strange whispering of little voices outside his window. He went and listened, and then noticed that it was the sparrows who were chattering together and telling one another of all kind of things which they had seen in the fields and woods. Eating the snake had given him power of understanding the language of animals. Now it so happened that on this very day the queen lost her most beautiful ring, and suspicion of having stolen it fell upon this trusty servant, who was allowed to go everywhere. The king ordered the man to be brought before him and threatened with angry words that unless he could before the narrow point out the thief, he himself be looked upon as guilty and executed. In vain he declared his innocence. He was dismissed with no better answer. In his trouble and fear, he went down into the courtyard and took thought how to help himself out of this trouble. Now some ducks were sitting together quietly by a brook and talking their rest, and whilst they were making their feathers smooth with their bills, they were having a confidential conversation together. The servants stood by and listened. They were telling one another of all the places where they had been waddling about all the morning, and what good food they had found, and one said in a pitiful tone, "Something lies heavy on my stomach. As I was eating in haste, I swallowed a ring which lay under the queen's window." The servant at once seized her by the neck, carried her to the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Here is a fine duck. Pray, kill her." "Yes," said the cook, and weighed her in his hand. "She has spared no trouble to fatten herself, and has been waiting to be roasted long enough." So he cut off her head, and as she was being dressed for the spit, the queen's ring was found inside her. The servant could now easily prove his innocence, and the king, to make amends for the wrong, allowed him to ask a favor, and promised him the best place in the court that he could wish for. The servant refused everything, and only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as he had a mind to see the world and go about a little. When his request was granted, he set out on his way, and one day came to a pond where he saw three fishes caught in the reeds and gasping for water. Now, though it is said that fishes are dumb, he heard them lamenting that they must perish so miserably. And as he had a kind heart, he got off his horse and put the three prisoners back into the water. They leaped with delight, put out their heads, and cried to him, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." He rode on, and after a while it seemed to him that he had heard a voice in the sand at his feet. He listened and heard an ant king complain, "Why cannot folks with their clumsy beast keep off our bodies? The stupid horse with his heavy hoofs has been trading down my people without mercy." So he turned on to a side path, and the ant king cried out to him, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." The path led him into a wood, and here he saw two old ravens standing by their nest and throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you idle, good-for-nothing creatures," cried they. "We cannot find food for you any longer. You're big enough and can provide for yourself." The poor young ravens lay upon the ground, flapping their wings and crying, "Oh, what helpless chicks we are. We must shift for ourselves, and yet we cannot fly. What can we do but lie here and starve?" So the good young fellow alighted and killed his horse with his sword and gave it to them for food. Then they came hopping up to it, satisfied their hunger, and cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." And now he had to use his own legs, and when he had walked a long way, he came to a large city. There was a great noise and crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, crying aloud, "The king's daughter wants a husband, but whosoever seeks her hand must perform a hard task, and if he does not succeed, he must forfeit his life." Many had already made the attempt, but in vain. Nevertheless, when the youth saw the king's daughter, he was so overcome by her great beauty that he forgot all the danger, went before the king, and declared himself a suitor. So he was led out to the sea, and a gold ring was thrown into it before his eyes. Then the king ordered him to fetch this ring up from the bottom of the sea, and added, "If you come up again without it, you will be thrown in again and again until you perish amid the waves." All the people grieved for the handsome youth. Then they went away, leaving him alone by the sea. He stood on the shore and considered what he should do, when suddenly he saw three fishes come swimming towards him, and they were the very fishes whose lives he had saved. The one in the middle held a mussel in his mouth, which it laid on the shore at the youth's feet. And when he had taken it up and opened it, there lay the gold ring in the shell. Full of joy, he took it to the king and expected that he would grant him the promised reward. But the proud princess perceived that he was not her equal in birth. She snorted him and required him first to perform the task. She went down into the garden and strewed with her own hands 10 sacks full of millet seed on the grass. Then she said, "Tomorrow morning before sunrise, these must be picked up, and not a single grain be wanting." The youth sat in the garden and considered how it might be possible to perform this task. But he could think of nothing, and there he sat sorrowfully waiting the break of day, when he should be let to death. As soon as he saw the first rays of the sun shone into the garden, he saw all the 10 sacks standing side by side, quite full, and not a single grain was missing. The ant king had come in the night with thousands of ants, and the grateful creatures had by great industry picked up all the millet seed and gathered them into the sacks. Presently the king's daughter herself came into the garden and was amazed to see that the young man had done the task that was given to him. But she cannot yet conquer her proud heart and said, "Although he has performed both the tasks, he shall not be my husband until he has brought me an apple from the tree of life." The youth did not know where the tree of life stood, but he set out and would have gone on forever, as long as his legs would carry him, though he had no hope of finding it. After he had wandered through 3 kingdoms, he came up one evening to a wood and lay down under a tree to sleep. But he heard a rustling in the branches, and a golden apple fell into his hand. At the same time, 3 ravens flew down to him, perched themselves upon his knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starving. When we had grown big and heard that you were seeking the golden apple, we flew over the sea to the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and have brought you the apple." The youth, full of joy, set out homewards and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter, who had no more excuses left to make. They cut the apple of life in 2 and ate it together, and then her heart became full of love for him, and they lived in undisturbed happiness to a great age.